Alright, lock in, close every other tab, put your phone face down, turn off the group chat notifications, because what we are about to break down today is not just a basketball story. This is not just a highlights reel. This is not just another feel-good sports moment that you scroll past on your timeline and double tap without really thinking about what you just watched. What we are about to dig into today is a full, complete, detailed breakdown of exactly what Caitlyn Clark just did on the international stage and why it matters more than anything that has happened in women's basketball in the last 2 decades, maybe ever. I'm talking about the FIBA World Cup qualifying tournament. I'm talking about Team USA winning gold. I'm talking about an 84-70 final score against Spain in the championship game. And I'm talking about one player, one singular generational, absolutely terrifying player, walking away from that entire tournament with the MVP trophy draped around her neck like it was always hers. Because it was. It always was. And look, I know what some of you are already thinking. You've heard the Caitlyn Clark conversation before, you've seen the highlights, you've read the takes, you've watched the debates play out on social media for months and months. You might even be a little tired of the conversation, and I get it. I completely understand that. But here is the thing, here is what makes today's breakdown different. Today we are not talking about college basketball, we are not talking about the Big Ten, we are not talking about the NCAA tournament or the Iowa Hawkeyes or any of that. Today we are talking about the international stage, the global basketball stage, FIBA competition, elite European professionals. The toughest, most physically demanding, most defensively disciplined competition that women's basketball has to offer outside of the WNBA playoffs. And Caitlyn Clark just walked into that arena, looked every single one of those elite international defenders dead in the eyes and absolutely cooked them. Systematically, methodically, brilliantly, in ways that made your jaw drop whether you were watching courtside or through your laptop screen at 2 in the morning. So get comfortable, grab your drink, because we are going all the way in on this one today. Every possession, every pass, every shot, every decision. We are going to break it all down, and by the time we are done here today, I want you to walk away with a complete, thorough, undeniable understanding of exactly what kind of player Caitlyn Clark is, and exactly what she just proved to the entire world on that hardwood. Let's go! Before we get into the tournament breakdowns and the individual game highlights and the MVP award, I think it is worth taking a step back and really properly establishing who Caitlyn Clark is for anyone who might be newer to this conversation. Because context matters, background matters. And understanding where she came from makes what she just accomplished on the international stage that much more extraordinary. Caitlyn Clark grew up in West Des Moines, Iowa. She was a basketball obsessive from the time she could walk, and I mean that almost literally. She was in the gym constantly, she was watching film, she was studying the game, she was not just practicing her shooting, she was studying the architecture of the sport, the geometry of it, the angles, the spacing, the decision trees that elite players navigate in real time at full speed. And from the very beginning, even as a young kid, she had this absolutely relentless competitive fire that her coaches and teammates all talk about. This deep burning need to not just play the game but to master it, to dominate it, to understand it at a level that most players never reach even after decades in the sport. She went to the University of Iowa, and what she did there over 4 years was nothing short of historically unprecedented. She became the all-time leading scorer in NCAA basketball history. Men and women combined, think about that for a second, the all-time leading scorer in the entire history of college basketball in the United States. That record stood for decades. Legends of the sport held that record, and Caitlyn Clark broke it. She did not sneak past it. She did not edge it by a couple of points, she shattered it. But here is the thing about Caitlyn Clark that separates her from every other high-volume scorer in college basketball history. The points were never the most impressive part of her game. The points were almost a byproduct, a natural consequence of everything else she was doing on the floor. What made her absolutely terrifying, what made opposing coaches lose sleep, and what made recruiting coordinators change their entire defensive game plans just for her, was the combination of skills she brought to the floor simultaneously. The shooting range that extended literally beyond what most people thought was physically possible at the collegiate level. The passing vision that allowed her to see things happening on the opposite side of the court before they happened. The pace control. The ability to shift between operating at full sprint transition speed and slowing the game down to a crawl in the half-court without ever losing control of the possession. She was not just a scorer, she was a complete offensive orchestrator operating at a level that had never been seen in the college game before. And when she finally made the jump to the WNBA with the Indiana Fever, the entire basketball world held its breath. Because the question was not whether she was talented, the question was whether that talent would translate. And spoiler alert, it did. Immediately, completely, and in ways that went so far beyond what even her most passionate supporters expected. But the WNBA regular season was just the beginning. The international stage, that was a whole different test, a completely different proving ground. And when the call came to put on the Team USA jersey and compete at the FIBA level against the best players the entire world had to offer, Caitlyn Clark showed up ready, completely, totally, undeniably ready. Now let me take a moment here to explain to anyone who might not be totally familiar with FIBA competition exactly why the international game presents such a unique and genuinely difficult challenge even for elite WNBA players. Because it is not just about the competition level, although that is certainly part of it. It is about the entire ecosystem of the game being slightly different in ways that compound on each other and make adaptation genuinely difficult. The first thing you need to understand is the court dimensions and the three-point line. The FIBA three-point line sits further back than the college line, but it is positioned differently than the WNBA line in terms of the corners and the angles. Elite shooters who have spent years developing muscle memory at one specific distance have to recalibrate. It sounds simple. It is not. The margin of error on a deep three-point attempt is so small that even a few inches of additional distance can fundamentally change the arc, the release point, and the probability of a make. Elite shooters adapt. Average shooters struggle. Great shooters sometimes take half a tournament to find their range. The second challenge is the physicality of European defensive basketball. European national team programs spend years, decades in some cases, developing defensive systems that are fundamentally different from what you see in the WNBA or even the NBA. Zone defenses are more sophisticated. Help rotations are tighter. Communication on the defensive end is more disciplined. These are players who have played together in their national programs for years. They know each other's tendencies, they know their rotations, and they know exactly how to make life uncomfortable for offensive players who have never faced their specific system before. The third challenge is the tempo. International basketball, particularly at the European level, tends to operate at a more deliberate half-court pace than the up-tempo transition game that defines the best offensive teams in the WNBA. For a player like Caitlyn Clark, whose greatest weapon is her ability to push pace and create easy looks in transition before defenses can set up, this is a genuine tactical challenge. It forces her to operate more in the half-court, to create off the dribble against set defenses, to manufacture offense in ways that are inherently more difficult than what she does best. And on top of all of that, you have the challenge of team chemistry. Playing in a national team setting with players from different franchises, different systems, and different roles than you are used to in your regular season team requires an enormous amount of adaptability. You have to learn your teammates' tendencies quickly. You have to understand who wants the ball where, who finishes best in certain areas of the floor, who you can trust on a skip pass in a tight situation. All of these factors combine to make the international stage a genuinely brutal proving ground. Players who look unstoppable in their domestic leagues sometimes struggle to translate that dominance internationally. It happens. It is not a reflection of their talent necessarily, it is just the reality of how different and how demanding international competition is. Which is exactly why what Caitlyn Clark just did in this tournament was so extraordinary, because she did not just survive these challenges, she did not just adapt, she did not just hold her own, she dominated. She was the best player in the entire tournament from start to finish, and she won the MVP award on the biggest stage women's international basketball has to offer. And she did it by doing things on the basketball court that made every single person watching, coaches, analysts, fans, former players, stop and say out loud, did she just do that? Yes, she did every single time. Okay, let's get into the good stuff. Let's talk about the actual plays, the actual moments, the specific sequences that had highlight accounts running out of superlatives and fans losing their minds in comment sections around the world. Because the thing about Caitlyn Clark's highlights from this tournament is that they were not just individually impressive. They were collectively overwhelming. It was not one great play in one great game. It was a sustained, relentless, tournament-long exhibition of basketball brilliance that built on itself with every passing game, until by the time the championship match against Spain arrived, the entire global audience already knew exactly what they were watching even if they did not quite have the words to describe it yet. Let's start with the passing, because I think the passing is where Caitlyn Clark most clearly separates herself from every other player at her level. Most elite scorers, and she is absolutely an elite scorer, we will get to that, but most elite scorers, when you watch their highlights, the passing is almost secondary. It is good, it is functional, it keeps the offense moving, but it is not the thing that makes you rewind the video. With Caitlyn Clark, the passing is the thing that makes you rewind the video every single time. And the specific play I want to highlight, the one that became the defining image of this entire tournament, is that full-court outlet pass to Paige Bueckers in the championship game against Spain. Here is the setup. Team USA is on defense. Clark is positioned near the perimeter. Spain runs a half-court possession, the shot goes up, comes off the rim, and Clark secures the defensive rebound. Now stop right there, because this is already the moment where Caitlyn Clark's basketball IQ completely separates her from normal players. Most players, when they grab a defensive rebound, are thinking about protecting the ball. They are thinking about clearing their space. They are thinking about finding an outlet and starting the possession. The decision of what to do next happens after the rebound is secured. Caitlyn Clark is already making that decision before the ball hits her hands. Her eyes are scanning the full length of the floor the moment the shot goes up. Before she even has possession, she has already identified where Paige Bueckers is. She has already calculated the angle of the pass, the distance, the trajectory, the speed at which Bueckers is moving, and the exact point on the floor where the ball needs to arrive to turn into an uncontested layup. She has done all of that math in a fraction of a second before the ball is even in her hands. And then she delivers. A full-court, laser-guided, perfectly weighted pass that travels the entire length of the basketball court and arrives exactly in the right spot for Bueckers to catch in stride without breaking her momentum and finish easily at the rim. The Spanish defense had no chance. They could not have had a chance even if they had been perfectly positioned, because the ball was already in the air before anyone knew what was happening. That is not athleticism. That is not just arm strength. That is elite basketball processing speed operating at a level that is genuinely rare. That is what separates good players from great players from once-in-a-generation players. And here is what I want you to understand about that specific play beyond just the wow factor of how it looked. That play changed the Spanish team's defensive approach for the rest of the game. After that pass, every single Spanish defender had to dedicate a portion of their mental bandwidth, every single possession for the rest of the game, to accounting for the possibility of Clark doing it again. That is an extra layer of cognitive load on the defense. It forces them to make decisions faster than they want to. It forces rotations to be less disciplined than they need to be. It creates the kind of defensive exhaustion that does not show up in the box score, but that any coach watching that film will immediately identify as a massive factor in the final outcome. One pass, one play, and it changed the entire defensive calculus for the rest of the championship game. That is what generational playmaking looks like. That is what we are dealing with. Now let's talk about the shooting, because oh my goodness, the shooting. The narrative heading into this tournament from the skeptical corners of the basketball conversation was that the FIBA three-point line would be an equalizer, that the slightly different distance and angle would expose range shooters who had built their games around a specific arc and a specific release point, that European defenders, more accustomed to defending the FIBA 3, would know exactly how to contest it in ways that WNBA defenders simply do not. And look, I understand that narrative. It had some logical foundation to it. Shooting is about muscle memory. Muscle memory is built around specific measurements and specific distances. Change those measurements even slightly and elite shooters sometimes struggle to recalibrate immediately. It has happened before, it will happen again. It just did not happen with Caitlyn Clark. In fact, and this is what I love most about how this tournament played out, she seemed almost energized by the challenge. Like the slightly different distance was not a problem to overcome. It was an opportunity to prove something. And she proved it with a series of deep three-point makes that were so far beyond the arc, so audaciously far from where most players would even consider pulling up, that the broadcast announcers literally ran out of adequate vocabulary. There was one specific shot in the championship game against Spain that I keep coming back to. She receives the ball on the perimeter with a defender closing hard. Most players in that situation take one or two dribbles to create separation, get to a more comfortable spot, and then initiate their shooting motion. Most players do not consider pulling up from where she received the ball. It is just too far. The math does not work for most players. The release has to be too fast, the arc has to be too perfect, and the margin for error is basically non-existent. Caitlyn Clark pulled up immediately. No hesitation, no extra dribble, one motion from catch to release and the ball is already on its way. High arc, perfect rotation. And it drops through the net so cleanly that for a moment the crowd does not even react because the audacity of what they just watched has not fully registered yet. And then it registers, and the arena goes absolutely wild. But here is what I need you to understand about that shot beyond just the impressiveness of the make. The Spanish defense had studied her shooting tendencies. They had film, they had scouting reports, they knew her range, they knew she could shoot from distance. And they still could not contain it, because there is a fundamental difference between knowing something intellectually and being able to actually guard it at full speed in real time. When a player can make shots from that distance with that kind of efficiency, the defensive math becomes almost unsolvable. If you play up on her and try to deny the catch or contest the release, you are giving her space to drive. She is an elite driver. She will take that space every single time and punish you. If you give her room off the ball and try to recover before she can shoot, she pulls up before you get there. You cannot win. You are choosing between two bad options on every single possession. And the cumulative effect of having to make that choice over and over again for 40 minutes is devastating. That is what elite shooting range does to a defense. It does not just score points. It creates an entire offensive ecosystem around the shooter where every other player on the team benefits because the defense is constantly distorted by the gravitational pull of the threat. We saw that in this tournament constantly. We saw driving lanes open up for American players that should not have been there based on the defensive positioning. We saw skip passes arrive at shooters who had more space than they should have had. We saw easy cuts to the basket go completely uncontested because the help defender was too busy accounting for Clark on the perimeter to rotate properly. She does not just score, she makes the entire offense better by existing on the floor. And at the international level, against elite defensive systems that are specifically designed to take away easy baskets, that kind of gravitational offensive impact is absolutely extraordinary. Alright, let us get specifically into the gold medal game because this is where everything came together. This is the game that the entire tournament was building toward. USA versus Spain. The gold medal, the championship, winner takes everything. Spain was not a pushover. I want to be very clear about that because it matters for context. The Spanish national team came into that championship game as a legitimate, battle-tested, supremely well-coached European squad with size, athleticism, and a defensive system that had given multiple teams serious problems throughout the tournament. They had players who competed at the highest levels of European club basketball. They had defenders who were physical, disciplined, and experienced. They were not there to make up the numbers, they came to compete for gold. And for stretches of that game, they made it genuinely competitive. They executed their defensive game plan. They used their size advantage in the post. They tried to slow the pace and make Team USA operate in the half-court where European teams traditionally have a structural advantage. They made adjustments. They competed hard. And Team USA still won 84-70. Still won gold. And still had one player who was so clearly operating at a different level than everyone else on the floor that by the fourth quarter the conversation had already shifted from who was going to win to which specific plays from this specific player were going to be the ones that live forever on highlight reels. The first half of that championship game was a fascinating chess match. Spain came out with tremendous energy and executed their defensive plan well. They packed the paint. They forced Team USA into half-court possessions. They used their physicality to contest every drive and make perimeter shooting difficult. And for stretches of the first half, that plan worked reasonably well. The American offense was not flowing freely. There were stretches of stagnation, possessions that went nowhere. But even in those stretches, even when the half-court offense was not generating easy looks, Clark was finding ways to be impactful. A defensive rebound here that triggered a fast break. A skip pass there that found a shooter just as a defender was collapsing. A drive into the lane that drew two defenders and created a kick-out opportunity that led to an open corner three. None of those possessions showed up as Clark scoring points, but all of them were Clark-generated opportunities that kept the American offense functioning even when the primary ball movement was not crisp. And then in the second half, something shifted. The way it always shifts when you have a player of her caliber on the floor for an extended period of time. Spain had used enormous defensive energy in the first half trying to contain the American perimeter attack. Their rotations were getting slower. Their help defense was a step behind where it needed to be, and Clark began to exploit those tiny gaps with increasing efficiency. That deep three from the logo area, the one that I mentioned earlier, came in the second half at a moment when the game was genuinely in the balance. Spain had clawed back to make it a real contest. Team USA needed a bucket, needed something to swing the momentum definitively, needed a play that would not just put points on the board but would psychologically deflate the Spanish bench and galvanize the American team. Clark gave them exactly that. She caught the ball further from the basket than most players would even think about shooting. She went up immediately. The shot was perfectly executed, and when it dropped through, you could feel the energy in the arena shift completely and permanently in Team USA's favor. That is what great players do in championship moments. They do not just score points. They make plays that change the entire psychological landscape of the game. They make plays that their teammates feel as much as they see. They make plays that the opposing bench has to work hard to recover from mentally. They make plays that announce definitively that this game is over even before the final score reflects it. After that three, Spain never seriously threatened again. Team USA extended the lead, executed down the stretch, and won the gold medal by 14 points in a performance that felt more dominant than the margin suggested because of the sheer quality of what Clark was doing every time she touched the ball. And when the final buzzer sounded and the MVP award was announced, there was not a single person in that arena, not a single coach, analyst, scout, player, or fan who was surprised by the outcome. It was the right call. It was the obvious call. It was the only call. Let's get analytical for a minute. Let's actually look at what Caitlyn Clark did throughout this tournament statistically and contextually to earn that MVP award. Because I think sometimes in the highlight-driven world of sports content consumption, we can get so caught up in the individual plays, the deep threes, the full-court passes, the jaw-dropping moments, that we lose sight of the sustained excellence that actually defines a tournament MVP performance. A great play here and there is exciting, but sustained production across multiple games against elite competition over the course of a full tournament, that is something else entirely. The efficiency numbers throughout this tournament were genuinely exceptional. Her shooting percentages from both inside and outside the arc reflected not just volume production but smart, high-quality shot selection. She was not forcing bad shots to pad her statistics. She was not chucking up contested mid-range attempts out of desperation. She was generating high-value looks through her movement, her decision-making, and her ability to read the defense and identify the optimal point of attack on every possession. But more than the raw scoring numbers, and the numbers were strong, the passing impact across the tournament was what elevated her performance from very good to genuinely historic. Her assist numbers reflected not just quantity but quality. She was not getting credit for easy dump-offs to cutters or short outlet passes. She was generating assists on difficult skip passes across the court, on precise pocket passes into cutting teammates, on the kind of creative, high-difficulty distribution that only the most gifted playmakers in the sport are capable of producing consistently. And then there's the pace-changing dimension of her game. This is one of the most underappreciated aspects of elite point guard play, and it is something that does not show up cleanly in any traditional statistical category. The ability to control the tempo of a basketball game, to speed it up when your team needs easy transition looks, and slow it down when you need to be deliberate in the half-court, is a skill that separates genuinely elite floor generals from simply talented scorers. Clark demonstrated this throughout the tournament in ways that opposing coaches had to adapt to constantly. She could push the pace in transition and create easy looks before defenses could set up. She could also slow things down, run a half-court set patiently, manipulate the defense through her movement and her shot threat, and then deliver a perfectly timed pass to a teammate at exactly the right moment. That versatility, the ability to be equally dangerous at multiple speeds, is extraordinarily rare. The defensive impact was also meaningful. Her length and her activity level disrupted passing lanes. She was engaged and connected defensively in ways that contributed to Team USA's ability to generate transition opportunities because her anticipation of the opponent's possessions allowed her to be in the right place to trigger fast breaks when the ball changed hands. But here is the thing that I keep coming back to when I think about the totality of her tournament MVP performance. It is not any one specific thing she did, it is the relentlessness of it, the sustained, game after game, possession after possession consistency of being the best player on the floor. In a tournament where the pressure builds with each passing round, where the stakes escalate and the opposition quality increases and the margin for error shrinks with every game, she got better. She was more impactful in the quarterfinals than in the group stage. She was more impactful in the semifinals than in the quarterfinals. And she was most impactful of all in the gold medal game against the best team in the tournament. That trajectory, improving as the stakes increase, is the single clearest indicator of a genuinely elite competitor. Good players perform at their ceiling when things are comfortable. Great players raise their ceiling when things get hard. And Caitlyn Clark raised her ceiling repeatedly throughout this tournament, until by the championship game she was operating at a level that was frankly unfair to the Spanish national team. The MVP award was not just deserved, it was the only possible outcome for anyone who actually watched the games. Here is something I want to spend some real time on because I think it is genuinely important, and I think it gets overlooked in a lot of the Caitlyn Clark conversation, which tends to focus very narrowly on the WNBA domestic market and the specific dynamics of American women's basketball. The international audience that watched this tournament did not come in with any of the pre-existing narratives. They did not come in with the months of WNBA drama and debate and hot takes and social media arguments. They did not come in with any particular rooting interest in how the American team was constructed or what role any individual player should have had. They came in as basketball fans, pure and simple, watching a high-level international competition and evaluating the players purely on what they saw on the court. And what they saw was a player who was clearly, unambiguously, undeniably the best player in the tournament, not because of narrative, not because of cultural moment, not because of social media following, but because of what she did with the basketball every single time she had it, every single possession, every single game. The international viewership numbers for this tournament reflect that. The global audience for women's basketball content featuring Caitlyn Clark has been growing steadily, and this tournament accelerated that growth significantly. Basketball fans in Europe and Asia, in South America, in markets that have historically paid very little attention to the American women's game, were tuning in specifically to watch her play, and what they saw did not disappoint. There is something very powerful about the international validation that comes from a performance like this, because international basketball audiences, particularly European audiences, are among the most knowledgeable and most critical in the world. They have grown up watching elite basketball at every level. They know the game deeply. They are not easily impressed by hype or marketing. They respond to actual skill, actual intelligence, actual competitive excellence. And they responded to Caitlyn Clark enormously. The social media engagement from international markets during the tournament was extraordinary. The clips of her full-court passes and her deep threes were shared and discussed and analyzed by basketball fans who had never watched a WNBA game in their lives. They were watching because the basketball itself was compelling, because the player was genuinely exceptional in ways that transcended any specific domestic narrative. That global recognition matters enormously for the future of women's basketball broadly. One of the consistent challenges for the women's game has been building an international audience that rivals what the men's game enjoys. And the path to that broader international audience runs directly through players who are so individually compelling, so cinematically watchable, so clearly special, that they pull in viewers who are not necessarily fans of women's basketball specifically, but who are fans of great basketball in general. Caitlyn Clark is that player. She has been that player in the domestic American market for several years now, and this tournament demonstrated conclusively that the international market is ready to embrace her in exactly the same way. The combination of her playing style, the long-range shooting, the creative passing, the pace-pushing transition game, and her competitive presence on the floor creates a watching experience that is genuinely unique in the women's game right now. There is nobody else doing quite what she does at quite the level she does it at. And unique, irreplaceable talent at an elite competitive level is exactly what drives global sports audiences. The FIBA MVP award was more than just recognition of her individual performance in a single tournament. It was the international basketball community officially acknowledging what American audiences have known for a couple of years now. She is special, she is different, and the global market for her basketball is only going to grow from here. Okay, I want to go really deep on the shooting for a minute because I think the casual sports fan sometimes hears she can shoot from really far away and nods along without fully appreciating exactly how technically difficult what she is doing actually is. Shooting a basketball from beyond the standard three-point line is hard. That sounds obvious, but I want to actually explain why, because it goes so much deeper than just needing more power. When you shoot a basketball from further away, the margin of error on every single component of your shooting mechanics shrinks dramatically. Your feet need to be more precisely aligned with the basket. Your hip rotation needs to be timed more perfectly. Your elbow position at the point of release needs to be more exact. The angle of your wrist at the release point needs to be more consistent. The arc needs to be higher to compensate for the additional distance while still arriving at the basket with enough energy to go in rather than rim out. And all of these tiny adjustments, each of which is individually almost imperceptible, need to happen in perfect synchronization in a fraction of a second, while an elite defender is closing at full speed trying to disrupt exactly those mechanics. Elite shooters who can make shots from extreme range at high volume and high efficiency possess a shooting technique that is remarkably consistent and remarkably compact. They do not have unnecessary motion. They do not have extra moving parts that introduce variability into the equation. Every component of their shooting motion works in efficient coordination to produce the same result over and over and over again, regardless of the pressure of the moment or the difficulty of the shot. Caitlyn Clark's shooting mechanics are genuinely exceptional in this regard. Watching her shot in slow motion, and I highly recommend you look this up if you have not done it, you see a release point that is extraordinarily high and consistently positioned. You see a follow-through that is complete and controlled. You see a release speed that is quick enough to get the ball off before defenders can fully contest it, but controlled enough to maintain the precision of the arc. And you see a ball flight that carries exactly the right trajectory to maximize the margin of the target, hitting the center of the net rather than clipping the rim, which is what elite shooters aim for rather than just getting the ball through the cylinder. All of that technical excellence allows her to make shots that other players simply cannot make. But the technical excellence alone does not fully explain the impact of her shooting on the game, because the psychological dimension of having a shooter of her range on the floor is genuinely different from what defenses have to account for with even very good shooters. Most elite shooters have a range that defenders can account for. There is a line on the floor, even if an imaginary one, beyond which a given shooter stops being a real threat. Defenders know where that line is. They can give a shooter space inside that line to take away the drive and dare them to pull up. But once you are outside the threat zone, you can relax the contest and worry about other things. Caitlyn Clark does not have that line at a position defenders can practically defend. She is a genuine shooting threat from so far beyond where most players would even attempt a shot that there is no safe space on the perimeter where a defender can recover without risk. There is no position where a defender can stand and think, okay, if she catches it here, I have time to close out before she can get a good look. That reality fundamentally changes how defenses have to structure their approach to guarding the entire American offense when she is on the floor. And the cascading effect of that defensive distortion on the rest of Team USA's offensive options was visible throughout every game of this tournament. We talked about the full-court pass to Paige Bueckers earlier, but I want to go deeper on the passing vision specifically because I think it is the most underappreciated dimension of her game, and I think it is actually where her basketball intelligence is most clearly on display. Great scorers are relatively easier to identify. You can look at a box score and see the points and the shooting percentages and get a reasonable sense of how good a scorer someone is. Great passers are harder to evaluate because the value of elite passing is not captured fully in assist totals. It lives in the decisions that were made on the possessions that created those assists. It lives in the pace at which those decisions were made. It lives in the alternatives that were available and were considered and were correctly rejected in favor of the optimal choice. Caitlyn Clark processes the floor at a speed that is frankly unusual for a player of any experience level, let alone someone who is still relatively early in her professional career. She scans the entire floor on every possession, every dribble. She's not just looking at her immediate defender or the player she is thinking about passing to. She's seeing the full picture, the positions of all 10 players on the court, the trajectories of how those players are moving, the defensive rotations that are about to happen, the spaces that are about to open up, and she is making calculations based on where things are going to be in 2 seconds, not where they are right now. That predictive dimension of elite court vision is what produces passes that look like they could not possibly be good passes, but arrive at a shooter or a cutter in exactly the right position at exactly the right time. The passer is not reacting to where the receiver is. The passer is delivering the ball to where the receiver is going to be, which requires processing the game not as a static photograph, but as a moving film that you can see slightly further ahead into than everyone else on the floor. In the championship game against Spain, there were multiple possessions where Clark had a reasonable shot available, not a great shot but a makeable one, and instead of taking it she held the ball an extra fraction of a second, waited for a defensive rotation to complete itself, and then delivered a pass to the open teammate that the defensive rotation had just created. She created the pass by waiting, by being patient enough to let the defense commit before making the optimal choice. That patience under pressure is extremely hard to develop and extremely rare to find at any level of the sport. Most players, when they have a reasonable shot available, take it. The instinct to score is powerful. The coaching to be aggressive is constantly reinforced, and the patience to pass up a good shot for a better one requires a combination of basketball intelligence and emotional regulation that very few players ever fully develop. Clark has it. She has had it for years. And at the international level, where the defensive rotations are more sophisticated and the margins between good shots and great shots are smaller than in domestic competition, that patience and that vision are even more valuable than they are in the WNBA. There was also a specific moment in the championship game, and I want to highlight this because I think it shows her passing intelligence in a slightly different context, where she caught the ball on the perimeter with a hard closeout coming at her. Most players in that situation either pump fake and drive or catch and shoot. Clark did neither. She recognized that the hard closeout had pulled the closeout defender's momentum completely toward her, and she immediately made a one-touch pass to the shooter on the opposite wing before the helper had time to rotate. The ball was out of her hands in under a second. No dribble, No hesitation, one look and one perfect pass. The resulting catch-and-shoot attempt was open because Clark had identified in a fraction of a second that the defensive rotation created by the closeout had left the opposite wing temporarily unguarded. She found it before the helper realized what was happening, and the resulting look was clean. That is elite passing. That is court vision operating at a level that makes basketball look almost easy when you are watching it in real time because the decisions come so quickly and so correctly that it almost appears that the game is just unfolding the right way on its own. It is only when you rewatch it slowly and think about the other options and the speed at which the decision was made that you realize just how remarkable it actually is. Alright, let's talk about what all of this means going forward, because this tournament was not just a standalone event. It was a preview. It was a demonstration. It was Caitlyn Clark showing the entire world exactly where her game is right now and exactly what the Indiana Fever and the WNBA at large are about to be dealing with when the season tips off. And what I see when I project this tournament performance forward into the WNBA season is genuinely exciting. Because the growth that was on display in this tournament, the refinements in her half-court game, the improved efficiency against elite physical defenses, the even higher level of passing creativity, all of that translates directly to the WNBA floor. The thing about elite players at her stage of development is that the improvements are not always linear, and they are not always immediately visible in the raw statistical numbers. But they are happening constantly. The mental adjustments she's been making, the tactical additions she's been incorporating, the physical development that comes from competing at the highest level consistently, all of it is building towards something that the WNBA is going to feel very directly. The spacing and shooting threat that she brings is going to be even more pronounced this season. The WNBA defenses have spent a full season and an off-season studying her tendencies. They have identified the areas they want to try to attack. They have designed schemes specifically aimed at making life difficult for her. And she has spent that same off-season studying everything they have been doing and figuring out exactly how to counter it. That is the beautiful chess match at the heart of elite professional basketball. The defense adjusts. The offense adjusts to the adjustment. The defense adjusts again. And the player who is best at processing those adjustments in real time and finding new ways to create advantage is the player who wins the long game. Caitlyn Clark wins the long game. She always has. From her early college days when opposing defenses tried different schemes to slow her down, and she found new ways to attack each successive adjustment, to the WNBA where she faced a physical and tactical challenge unlike anything she had experienced before and adapted rapidly, to this international tournament where European defensive systems presented completely new challenges, and she solved them game after game. The WNBA season ahead is going to be extraordinary. The Fever have built a better supporting cast around her. The team chemistry and understanding of how to play alongside her has deepened significantly, and she is coming off an international MVP performance that will have done wonders for her confidence and her specific preparation for the challenges ahead. Opposing coaches are watching this tournament film very carefully right now. They are trying to find the right defensive approach. They are running through their options and they are not finding great ones, because there is no clean defensive solution to a player who can beat you off the dribble, can make shots from practically anywhere on the floor and can find the right pass faster than your rotations can get there. You can mitigate, you can make things slightly harder, but you cannot eliminate the threat. And that is the reality of what every team in the WNBA is going to be dealing with this season. Okay, here is where I am going to get a little bit philosophical, because I think when we talk about Caitlyn Clark and what she is doing for women's basketball, we owe it to ourselves to think about it properly, to understand the full weight of this moment, because this is one of those rare situations in sports where you can actually feel in real time that you are watching something that matters beyond the immediate game result. The history of women's basketball in the United States is a story of brilliant players and brilliant moments that, for far too long, existed in a kind of cultural shadows. Players who were absolutely extraordinary, technically, athletically, competitively, but who never received the mainstream cultural recognition that their talent deserved. Who played their careers in front of smaller crowds than they deserved, on smaller television contracts than their games warranted, without the kind of broad public awareness that should have been their birthright as elite athletes. That story has been changing gradually for years, but the speed of that change has accelerated dramatically over the past couple of years in ways that are directly connected to what Caitlyn Clark has brought to the game. The television ratings growth, the arena attendance records, the merchandise sales, the social media engagement, the corporate sponsorship interest, the mainstream sports media attention, all of it has grown at rates that were genuinely unimaginable just a few years ago. And now, with an international MVP award in her trophy case and a gold medal around her neck, and a global audience that is bigger and more engaged than it has ever been, She is carrying that momentum into what might be the most important WNBA season in the history of the league. That is not an exaggeration. The attention that the women's game is receiving right now is a generational opportunity. The window to build permanent structural growth, the kind of growth that survives beyond any individual player's career and creates a foundation for generations of future players, is open right now in a way it has rarely been before. And that window is open largely because of what one player has done on a basketball court. The legacy conversation for Caitlyn Clark is just beginning. She's still young, she's still developing, she's still adding to her game in ways that are going to be visible over the course of multiple WNBA seasons. But what she has already accomplished, the records, the ratings, the global recognition, the international MVP, already places her in a conversation that will be ongoing for decades. Future players, decades from now, are going to point to this era as the moment that changed everything. The moment when women's basketball broke through to a level of mainstream cultural relevance that it had never previously achieved, and they are going to point to one player as the primary catalyst for that change. So let me bring it all home. Let me land this plane and leave you with exactly what I want you to carry with you from today's breakdown. Caitlyn Clark just went to the international stage, the most demanding, most physically grueling, most tactically challenging basketball environment on the planet outside of the Olympics, and she was the best player there, not one of the best. The best. The tournament MVP, the gold medal winner, the player who made the plays that everyone is still talking about days later. She did it with passes that defied physics. She did it with shots that defied geography. She did it with a basketball intelligence that defied expectations. And she did it on a stage where the entire world was watching, including basketball audiences in markets that had never paid attention to the American women's game before. The FIBA voters saw it, the international coaches saw it, the global audiences saw it. Millions of new fans who had never watched a WNBA game in their lives saw it and immediately went looking for more, because that is what genuine talent does. It creates demand. It builds audiences. It makes people who were not previously fans into people who cannot wait to watch the next game. The WNBA season is coming. The Fever are ready. She is ready. And after everything the world just witnessed in this tournament, the competition should be very, very ready too. Because Caitlyn Clark just showed every team in the league, showed every coach, every defender, every scouting department, exactly what she is capable of when the stakes are at their highest and the competition is at its most elite. The only question left is how they plan to stop it. And based on everything we just watched, I do not think they have a good answer. Welcome to the era of Caitlyn Clark. The world just got officially notified. And I will see you in the next breakdown.